My worldview is the beliefs that I build my life on. It's how I view everything in life. It's how I view God. It's how I view Satan. It's how I view myself. It's how I view other people. My worldview includes my thoughts about life, about death, about the past, the present, the future. Your worldview includes what you feel about pain and about suffering and about problems and about good and about evil. Your worldview includes what you think about time, about money. Everything you think about life is included in what we call your worldview. You know, Chuck, I can't tell you how excited I am about this conversation we're going to have. About 30 years ago, I was in Japan teaching English when you wrote Born Again, and I read it. It was one of the few English books that I could get, and ever since then, I've just been a fan. I've read your columns for all these years in Christianity Today and Breakpoint, and if there were one guy that I'd want to talk about worldview with, it's you, and so thank you for honoring me with this. I really want you to just share.
Thank you. I really appreciate this because it's a great opportunity for you and I to talk about a subject that I think hits home with every single person once they understand it.
What I really want to do, Chuck, in this is just kind of let the people in on our conversation. And we're not going to lecture or anything. I just want to ask you some questions and we'll just talk about it. This issue of worldview, first place, let's just start with the definition. What are we talking about when we say worldview?
Well, most people hear that, Rick, and they think it's a college professor sitting with a pipe and a ivy-covered tower. Now, the fact of the matter is, worldview is very practical. Every single human being has a worldview. The basic ideas...
Everybody does?
Sure.
Yeah.
The basic ideas by which you understand how the world works become your worldview. Everybody's got different worldviews because they start with different premises. But worldview, from a Christian perspective, is the way the world is supposed to be.
But how do you know if you've got a worldview? I mean, you said everybody's got one.
Well, start asking some questions. I mean, you've asked the critical question of all. Yeah. What's your purpose in life?
Yeah.
What gives you purpose is the definition of how the world works and what's true and what is real. And then you all of a sudden discover, oh, I've got a purpose from that. But people go through life seeking the wrong things often because they don't understand the framework of reality.
They don't know why they're doing what they're doing?
They don't know why they're doing what they're doing.
Okay.
That's a very good way to put it. C.S. Lewis said there are two great questions in life. One is, you know, where did we come from? Is there a natural law, something that guides us? And the second great thing is we know it, but we don't do it. I mean, those are the two big things. That
incongruity between action and knowledge.
Two big things about the worldview. One, where we came from tells us who we are, basically. And the fact is we don't live by it, which is the second point of a worldview, that is we fall into sin. But once you have this understood from a biblical perspective, it changes the way you see all of life. I've discovered that Christianity isn't just for my personal satisfaction. Christianity deals with all of life. It deals with
every
everything.
area.
And when people miss this, what happens is we all cluster in our churches on Sundays, and we all feel good about ourselves, which is, as you put it so poignantly and powerfully, Christianity is not about you, it's
not about you.
God. And we fail to live it the rest of the week.
You know, I want to ask you to define worldview in just a minute, but first I want to say again, how did you make this switch where all of a sudden you realized it mattered? I mean, if everybody's got one, and we obviously before we can even change it, we got to know what we've got.
I started working in the prisons, Rick, 30 years ago when I got out of prison, 31 years ago. And I discovered that as fast as I'd work in the prison kept growing. When I got out of prison, there were 229,000 people in prison in America. Today, there's 2.3 million. And so a few years into it, I thought, that this is shoveling sand against the tide, and against the waves. I'm not going to make any progress with this. So I began to study what was causing crime. What I discovered was causing crime was the moral breakdown in our society and people making wrong moral decisions. So I began to think about this, and I realized if I'm going to minister in the prisons, I've got to understand why there's so many people here, why there's so many broken lives. And I discovered it was the breakdown of the family. I discovered it was, in some part, the neighborhoods they lived in. It was basically sin. People didn't understand.
But fundamentally, you're saying belief determined behavior.
Beliefs determine behavior. And I suddenly discovered I better start figuring this out. So I started reading a lot and reading some of the scholars. And I discovered that when you think about Christianity, you're thinking about all the great questions that people ask in life are answered in the Bible. The Bible is a complete guidebook for every aspect of life.
It is.
And so why would we just limit it to our personal salvation? And I began to see that if I don't preach this, that I'm not going to ever change what's happening in the prison system, which is where God's called me to minister. And we've got to do something about the state of our society. We've got to do something about the values we live by. What values do you live by becomes a worldview.
How would you define worldview? What do you, give it to me in layman's terms, not some kind of, Harvard term. But
the way the world works and how you fit in.
Okay, the way the world works.
The way the world works.
And how you fit in.
Right. Everybody's worldview is determined by how you answer 4 questions. And it's very important for people to get this in mind because all through this series we're going to use this as a grid, a framework to discuss other worldviews. The basic questions. Where did I come from? Christian says, of course, God created us. The secularist says we came out of the soup, evolution. Second question is, why is there such a mess in the world? Everybody knows there's a mess in the world. If God created a good world, why is there such
obvious.
a mess? Okay. But this is a question people stumble on. Why is there such a mess? And third, is there a way out? Because every single philosophy, worldview, and religion tries to deal with the question of redemption. And what is the way in which people are redeemed? And fourth, if we are redeemed, then what now is our purpose? How now should we live? Which is the title of a book I wrote. Because if we're right that we have a purpose in life, which is what you've been preaching about so well, then what does it mean and how do we live it? And if there is no purpose, what do we do with our lives? So 4 questions. Where did I come from? Why is there such a mess in the world, sin and suffering? Is there any way out of it? Is there any hope? And fourth, what do I do?
Well, I don't think anybody's going to want to miss this series if we deal with those questions because everybody's asked them.
Well, yeah, and when you look at all the different worldviews, and as soon as you understand them, you see one of them everyone breaks up on one of those 4 points.